And am I recording? Hold on. Check that. Looks like I'm recording. Can you guys see the recording button? I don't see it on
the
my
red light's
side.
on.
Yeah, okay, very good. Okay, welcome to the Stump the Checker version 4. Like the other sessions, this will be an interactive lesson. So if you have items that you want to bring up and discuss in this roundtable format, feel free. I do have some checking tips that I want to review first. Then I'll open format, and then I have a few additional items if I need to go over those specifically. On the recent project, we're working on this lumen, and it's got a lot of very complicated conditions happening. There's some very specific things that are happening when we get to some of these corners and how the parts are working and how the vertical trim and the head members, the cut lengths of our horizontal face stops at the head and the sill. And we have an articulated vertical mullion, which is got an offset to the front and the back. It's got very gigantic glass in it. So there's a lot of things happening on the project. We built out a series of prototype units, and we refined those a few times as we were going through. The shop drawings were getting further refined based on having calcs done, some markups from the drafting and the takeoff team. The PM noticed some items. So the set that we're working with now, this 924 set, has incorporated a lot of updates from the time when we first started building the prototype units. We recently went through and finalized what all the prototype units were doing. We fine-tuned them so that they've got a lot of additional detail in them. So I wanted to show a few examples of how some of those parts are working, some of the CAD layouts that we're doing, and some of the logic that we're trying to encompass in those prototype units that should enable us to do our checking process without having to rethink the entire project, because we've done that work up front. For the example, I want to use this unit 33CV. So what I'm going to do is put shop drawings on one half, and then I'm going to open up this blank one on the other half. This is an updated prototype unit. So as a prototype unit, it was developed with the same left and right detail. So similar to a lot of the prototypes, in this case, it's a corner. If you check a horizontal type part, it's going to be mitered on both ends. In this instance, it's a 41.5 degree miter on both sides. We have the cut size laid out here is this 19 and 31/32. The cut, the DP to DP dimension here is that 31 and 13/32. So if you were strictly looking at the PDF, you could still determine what the DP to the cut size is on this particular miter, even if you ran across this on a job condition and you had this 1/657 detail, which would be this particular corner. If you had this on the left side, for example, but then you had a different detail, either it might be an articulated vertical on the right, or it might be there are some walls that are straight, so it might be just a split mullion on the right. By looking at how the math is set up from the DP to DP, compared to the cut size on the part, you could do your deduction, divide that in half because this deduction is on both sides. And that would give you the deduction from the dim point to the cut size on any of the horizontal parts. So that's one method that we might use to do that. The other way, however, is we have this is on the detail, the 83 degree. We did a whole series of CAD details that, let me bring this over to the screen. So the CAD detail shows the vertical parts, the orientation, what the degree of the corner is, and then it's got all of the horizontal parts dropped in there, and they're color coded so that you can actually see each of the parts and their cut lengths. That particular part that I brought up first is this LUM 2101. If you hover over that white line, you see it highlights that part. So you can see the overall shape, how it's sized. It's cut to daylight. And then the layout here is from the dim point to the cut size of that part. So that's another method you could use if you wanted to use the CAD drawing to review that. Let me go back to the unit for a minute. If you were tracking your way up this unit, when you get to this head member, you'll see that it has a lot of things happening on it. So in addition to the miter, it has to overlap the top of the vertical. It needs to be notched for the bayonet. There's a slot in it in order to access a floor type hook lug. The corner has to be lopped off in order for the face stop to work. And there's cut size, dim A's and dim B's. So there's a ton of things happening here. If you are going to check this to verify each of these conditions, and you went back to your CAD drawing for that, this was the 76. You can find each of those conditions on the CAD drawing, and they're all laid out with the part numbers, the deductions, what it is from the dim point to the cut size, from the dim point to the dim A. It's showing where the slot goes, where this is the slot where you have that floor type anchor that's being used, but we need to access it to be able to basically jack the unit up and down to level it at the corner. And all of these layouts have been verified. So if you came across this particular unit, you could go and validate all of these points using this CAD drawing because they've all been laid out. But the shortcut that I would propose is that realistically, when you get to this unit on the elevation, you only need to go to, now this is a prototype, so this is not a real unit, but let's say this was your DP to DP. You would just need to go from the DP to the cut length on that part, which again, you can get that based off of here. And on your head member, it's this 3208. So you find your 3208. The cut size is from the DP to the cut size is listed here. So in practical terms, you could just go DP to cut size on this end, find whatever the other detail was. So if the other detail was this articulated vertical, and it was this one in the front, then you would find that part, go to your cut size on that on the front side, and then you'd be able to do that deduction on the other end of the unit. After you did those two deductions, match the cut size. The remainder of the fab that's on here would be already validated based on the prototype units in the setup. So in order to create a slightly a refined checking process. The prototype units have been validated, and all of the layouts, you'll see that there's different offsets to that slot from the left and the right end. So all of those are completed and verified. So in practical terms, if you know that that's the correct angle for that part, and then on the other side, you could look at the cut size for that other template as well. Then you can get your cut lengths and all of the associated dim A's, dim B's, the pocket filler lengths for your SRTs, all of that would be correct. So that's just an additional tip on how to use some of the information that's already been developed in order to streamline that checking process. That doesn't mean that you don't look at things and make sure that they make sense. In fact, if you were looking at this for the first time, you may want to verify each of those independently just so that you're familiar with those. But once you've got to that point where you understand how it was developed, how we got these templates built based on the prototypes, then you can use that little shortcut to just get your cut size, and the rest of it is already correct. Okay, so let me open up the floor for a minute on that item. Commentary, questions?
It seems like that is, I don't know, I feel like I'd be hesitant to do that, Bill, but I guess it makes sense. As like you say, as long as the end cuts and everything match what's been established before, but I guess you'd have to maybe be the one that had worked on that before and know that that's what they're supposed to be,
Yes.
or have something else to compare it to, because yeah, that makes sense. But it just seems like, yeah, a lot of times I see, you know, for whatever reason, the end conditions with these notches and things might be a little bit different from part to part for a variety of reasons. So you'd have to watch out for those kind of things as well.
And the other caution there is that if you have a left end and a right end and they're assembled, they're going to be on a template that's showing the equals, right? Because your left and right end would be a fab whatever equals a whatever. And so those combined versions of the templates, you would need to look at them to make sure they make sense. If you're cut out for this part, for example, on that CAD layout was showing that that was only 12 inches in that case, but you were showing some dimension similar to this or a 16-inch or something, then that might trigger that somehow that left and right connection didn't make sense in that case. And that's why we do look at things with a critical eye to make sure that things make sense. But Quentin, I like that the thing you pointed out especially was that I'm familiar with these because I did these layouts. Chris and I worked on these a lot. We refined them several times. And so I have that high level of trust. If someone's coming in from scratch, you need to build that trust a little bit. And the way that you would do that is by going to these layouts and seeing, okay, this is how that thing works. I understand what's happening here. It makes sense. And then when you combine this layout with this layout, the 554, that one and this one, when you combine those two layouts and you're proving your math at that point, then it'll start to make more sense about how the parts are sized. Okay.
So also another comment on the, if you go back to the PDF, I don't think we normally show of the part, that dim A at the back. I don't think we usually show a dimension that extends that to the end of the part. So depending on the angle, that'd be something that you'd pick up in the in your layout. But is that ever a dimension that would be shown on the drawing like this? Because like you say, if we just go through, we figure out our cut size based on the dim points and everything. And then you can see dim B would be pretty easy because you can subtract those 2 and 13/30 seconds from each end.
Yes.
But then dim A, you'd still have to have or you'd have to refer back to your layout to know what deduction to take from either end. Right?
Correct. Yes. And in this case, because there were so many points that were critical to how the part indexes, especially because it ties in with the corner beads, and these run through where the horizontal face covers run short and there's a specific gap in them. We did intentionally add in the front finished cut dimension and the back finished cut dimension as well. So we got all of those reference details. And if you were doing that combination where this other one, if it's articulated, this will just be a straight cut on this end, but you'll still have that dim A in order to get to how that part notches over the top of the articulated vertical, and then how it comes over to this mitered corner.
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you have a dim B without a dim A?
You could, if the dim A was the dim B was specific for what it was doing. You might have a dim B as a finished cut size on a compound mitered part, for example, and that finished cut size might be a byproduct of the cut length and the compound miter. So if it was, for example, aligned with the glass pocket, if it was a vertical part that was tilted back and cut at a compound miter, your dim B might be your finished point, long point to short point along that glass pocket. So you may not have a dim A on it.
So on your fab, is this something we've established where dim A would be your back finish dimension and dim B would be your front finish dimension? So like, let's say for a sill member of at a capture, you don't have that notch that goes over the vertical, right? So it would just be a straight 45, but then you need that front notch because of the trims that you have, right, on the corner trim.
Yes.
Would we still dimension it and call it as a dim B, and not, we don't really need a dim A, right? Because that miter will handle that cut size.
That could be one way that we use it. We haven't documented that yet to see if that's the decision. I know Chris was tinkering around with some ideas that the dim A would be in a specific plane on the part, where the dim B would be in the specific plane. So basically the dim A on the back and the dim B on the front. But we haven't solidified that yet.
Okay, because I'm asking because Lumen ground floor has that. So yeah. I need some type of dim, but should I call it dim B or should I call it a dim A or something else?
I would say if it's going to be similar parts, we have a similar setup for the Lumen parts. Try to keep the dim A's aligned with how we have the dim A set up here. And if you don't need that cut length, then just call it the dim B.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. Okay.
But Bill, do you think dim is needed because usually the shop need that one for the reference?
In this particular case,
deeper.
Pedro's bringing up one that's a slightly different condition than this. But
Okay.
yes, I would maintain the dim A here because you've got a cut length, which includes a part that has a chamfer on it, plus it's got a secondary notch. So yes, I would definitely include that, which is why it's showing up on our prototypes.
Thanks.
Okay.
What I want to mention, it's I like the idea of the color codes on the CAD file, because I know downstream when we started the process, it was hard to understand the logic on the cut size. But I really like the idea, like you have the part with the color, and I think it's pretty easy to find and to follow the logic when you're checking units. So I really like that idea. It was hard.
Yeah, I knew there was so many things going on here. I wanted to make it so that the visual controls made sense. So each of the parts is color coded. Plus, you can actually see the profile of the part when you go to like the sill part. That's where the sill is. When you go to the head, that's how the head needs to be notched, for example. So all of those things are incorporated into the layouts because there's so much happening there. If they were all just on, you know, a single color or a single layer, it is hard to see. So
Yeah, and the other comment that I have, it's only an idea, because I have something similar when I'm working on the sunship brackets and brake shape. I know it's completely different logic, but can we create like a folder into the project for each single project, so we combine all those kind of layouts or something? I know it's on the prototype units, right? But I'm
yeah,
talking about.
so we do. Let me just walk you through how to find that type of folder. So when you go into, this is the temp folder in the J drive, but let's go to Lumen here. When you go into drafting, then under takeoff, we have the prototype final fabs. So there we have the layout folder. So this is the layout for all the things that are specifically related to the prototypes. Now, sometimes we'll also do additional layouts that are more for quick reference, and they don't have the amount of detail that we put into those. So if you're doing that, then under drafting and takeoff, there's a sketch folder. And so you've got the different sketch of the various, sort them by type here. So all of the sketches that we've done so far. In this case, Eddie gave us a bunch of the layouts for the embeds, so we could verify what was happening. We have a lot of small steel clips that our sill tracks have to attach to. So we've done a lot of the sketches in order to save copies of these, where we're maybe saving an occasional layout on here, but not a fully formed layout like what we see in the prototypes final fabs folder. The prototypes one is specific to the layouts that were developed in order to create the prototype units. So it's these types where you're actually developing all of the logic and the sizes. And then the sketch folder is primarily for when you're creating a working sketch in order to develop how some of your sizing or notching or some of your layouts is working. And it's usually past the prototype phase when you start getting into that folder.
Okay. So do you think it's a good idea maybe in the future? I mean, or we can think about it like if I move all my personal sketch to somewhere, because right now all the brake shape is floating everywhere. And if we have compiled all those files, it will be great.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I think the sketch folder was mainly for items that shouldn't be in other locations, but you don't want to throw them away, and you still want to share it with the team. So yeah, it doesn't have to be drawings in here. It could be Excel sheets, PDFs, anything that people would need in the future that doesn't belong anywhere else.
yeah, I've got some PDFs in here of a zipper study that I was doing to try to determine what was happening with the setting with some of the blocks there. So any of those can wind up in the sketch folder. It's basically, it's a place to capture what's on your mind as you're creating these various layouts, but other people might benefit from them in the future when they're working on the project, and you don't have to search for them because that's where they're captured, is in the sketch folder.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So the sketch folder, however, is not a default folder. So for my case, the first time that I did a layout, I just put it in the sketch folder to start with. And then from there, once I had it fully fleshed out, I moved over the completed versions to the prototypes final fab. So I actually started in the sketch folder and then just moved them when I was done. All right, excellent. So open format, any doesn't have to be even related to this particular project. I have other items that I can bring up, but just want to open the floor if anybody has something in particular that they want to talk about. Okay. All right, so next one is about Kaizen events. If you're doing a Kaizen, let me bring this over. If you go to our engineering training page, as you know, when we're doing training classes, first we publish them here on the classes that we're going to be doing. So you can see that today's topic is the checking tips and Stump the Checker. But after we produce those classes, they're listed down below in the classroom training content, and we have the classroom training. Well, several months ago, Brad, who does the Kaizen events, he had come and visited with us several times, and he's still doing some occasional lean classes for us. So he had done a lean class for us on, let me minimize this so I can see the name of it. So if you go to classroom training, you've got this how to run an effective Kaizen. So this is the full lesson. It's, I think it's almost 2 hours long, but then there's also broken out into 2 portions. One of them is the 5 why portion, and then the other one is how to run an effective Kaizen, the SIPOC portion. So that's the part I wanted to talk about in a little bit more detail. You can actually watch Brad's portion of that lesson just by clicking here. It'll link you to that part of this overall session, but it'll already be advanced to that section on doing the SIPOC. We saw that this was beneficial when we were working on several projects. So if you go to some of these Jamboards, for example, well, here's our project setup Jamboard. And we've got this developed now, broken up into the steps. And then we have each of the steps listed out with what our plans for our processes are. So basically, this is the skeleton of how we want to create what's happening. Like most Kaizens, we started out here trying to just map out what our current state was, what are we experiencing so far. Then mapping out what our ideal process would be, and going from there. Now, one of the things that we did was we used the concepts from that video, and we did this SIPOC, which is this supplier input, process, output, and customer. It's an analysis of what is needed in order to clarify what are you trying to get out of your process. So the way that it's set up is that it's not in the order of SIPOC, but it actually starts here, the process. So you're trying to identify what is it that we're doing. The way that we wound up using this is we developed the 2 boards. The first one is these first few stages, which is actually the process, output, customer, and requirements. And then we did the supplier input and the requirements from that afterwards. But basically at this point, you're asking these series of questions. Okay, what is it that we're doing? You write out all of those steps. You're trying to determine, what does this process do? And then what is your output from there? what do we deliver from doing this process? In our case, we looked at the prototype unit setup and what are we delivering? We're trying to see, okay, we're making sure that we've built out this, for example. This might be one of the products of our work, is having this layout done so that anybody can use that in their future processes. So then we're going to, who's the customer that used this? Well, in that one that we were just looking at, that the customer could have been the PE and the PC, because you can use that to verify what's coming in. And then you can also use it to check the outputs of the tickets. Then you go to, well, what is the customer wanting from this output? So if we were going to give this, and for example, if Quentin was going to be using that, and he may want to know, well, what I really want to determine is what happens when I put those two together. How do I make sure that my dim A is correct when I combine a left side and a right side? So that might be what's percolating in his mind. So we may have to ask that question. If we're just working on what our process is, but we don't know what our customer wants, then we might be missing something in how that process should actually be developing content for the person that's going to be using it. So this is sometimes a key point that's overlooked when you're doing a Kaizen event. You get in, you're like, okay, this is how we do it now. This is how things would be better in the future if we did these certain things. But you may forget that you have customers for what you're trying to accomplish. So it might be a good idea to go in and check with your customers to see, what is it that we're building that you're using? How are you approaching it? What's the value for you? What would you pay me to do if you're buying this from me? We track back over now to the inputs. So where are you getting the information to do your process? How do you get that? Where does it come from? Who's giving it to you? Okay, and then you go up another level from that. Well, who's giving the information to the thing that you're starting with? So in our case, if we're starting with the Revit model and creating an intersection report, who's developing the Revit model? Has it been checked yet? You may want to develop what are the stages that happen before it gets to you, so that you know what is it that you're getting, and are there some improvements to the process on how you're receiving materials. If you're a customer for the information, you may want to check with your supplier and let them know, just like you're doing here, hey, you're my supplier here. This is what I'm doing with what you're giving me. And then the 8 is the requirements. So what's required from the inputs to do that process? If you were getting something and you were expecting it to have profile modifiers in it in order to make your data do certain tasks without having to develop a new shop drawing detail, but your profile modifiers are inconsistent or they're missing, then maybe you don't really have what you need in order to do those tasks. So the way that we use this as we were going through the project setup process, is we just laid it out into these columns, and we decided, okay, well, what is it that we're doing from the start to the finish? And we listed out all of the tasks and some of the areas that we thought we could have improvements. So the process is very similar to how we do other Kaizen events. You have the stickies that show the current process, the improvement, and then some ideas, or there could be some red stickies in there of things that were not working well yet. And then we did the same thing for the output. So after we develop all of these, what's our output? Well, we want to have reusable data and fabs. We want to make sure that it's ready. We want to make sure that there's a schedule set up for it. We want to have a Swiss and an SOP for how this work is done. We want to make that so that it's consistent. Oh, look at this, fab names, dim A, dim B, etc. We wanted that as a byproduct of our outputs. And guess what? We're not there yet. We're still asking that question, right? We've been on this for a while, but we haven't finalized that particular item. But that's one of the things we'd like to have there, okay? And then who's our customer? We looked at who's using what it is that we're producing in this process. And then the requirements, okay, well, we want to have reusable data. We want it to be complete, no defects. We want it to be standard so that the way that it looks is consistent. We wanted quality. We wanted all these project issues to be finished and developed. And we wanted a good feedback loop so that if there's things that we're doing that make sense and like, oh, that was really good for me, we want to hear that so that we can build on that. At the same time, we're like, yeah, I couldn't figure out what that dim A was because I didn't have a reference dimension for it on your prototype layout. We want to know that too. So if that's an important piece to add into that particular template each time, then we add those in each time. Okay.
Bathtub by myself, please.
Okay. Sorry about that. Where was I? Let me go to the next card. And then getting together with the suppliers. Who's providing all this information? Where do we get all this stuff from? So we get it from Jumpstart, from discussions with the shop and the field. Team Esley provides a bunch of stuff. We're looking at the Revit model, BIM 360. There's a bunch of things where we've got Dynamo scripts we're doing. So a lot of things can be the supplier in this case for the data, the information that we're getting. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I jumped. So the inputs. So we need to do, what do we need? Logic, we need the intersections, what system it is. We need the dies, we need all the families loaded. We need the calcs, we need a handoff. We want to know what's the drafter doing? How is that thing set up? Or how far along are you? How close are we to getting finished with this? And then we go back to the supplier. Where do we get it from? Then we jump back over to what's required in order to do the process. So you have to make sure that you have enough data, that it's consistent, that the logic makes sense. So all of those items are part of developing how the SIPOC works. All right, so that's sort of the rundown of a specific example of how we use the SIPOC. We also did this very effectively for the installation manual Kaizen. We have a lot of boards here, so let's see. So in the installation manual Kaizen, we were developing our basically our problem statements, and then we're listing all those out. And then we were trying to see, well, okay, if we were going to list out what our process looked like, and we started just getting everyone's ideas and then combining them on this board, and then it just got really complicated. So we went and did the SIPOC for this one, and we boiled it down to a much cleaner version of what it was that we wanted to try to accomplish. We realized a lot of the things that we were thinking about doing, some of the, you know, the nice things, if you if you guys recall from the offsite, we did a little sample where we created a little thing where you could scan a QR code and it would pop up a video of how this thing was working. And all those things were maybe nice, but there wasn't really a customer for those. There wasn't anybody that was asking for that, that was saying, oh man, this would be the coolest thing ever. And even if it was cool, is somebody buying that from us? Nobody was asking for it. And so after we did the SIPOC, we boiled down our logic to what was, what do we really need to do? What are we trying to produce? So once we decided that what we were producing and who was our customer for those, we were able to really clean up our overall process, and we got it down to this. So we had a bunch of things. In fact, we simplified it even more than that. Let me go back. I think it's on the other side of the SIPOC now. So this is our simplified future version. Even our original version, we had like 12 things, and we boiled it down to 6. So just understanding the nature of a Kaizen event, and you get a lot of ideas percolating. All that stuff's very good. And, mapping out what your current state is, all of those things are awesome. But if your thing is getting stalled, using a SIPOC can definitely get you back on track because it really solidifies the steps. So the SIPOC has a couple of additional steps that aren't normally included in, like the process mapping and creating the yellow and red and blue stickies to develop that ideal future state. This also brings in the suppliers and the customers as a much more prevalent part. And again, just to emphasize, this can actually help get your Kaizen rebooted if you need it. Okay, so I'm just going to open that up for discussion for a minute.
Is doing the SIPOC, is that a requirement with the Kaizen, or
It's not. It's not a requirement with the Kaizen, but the reason that I'm bringing it up in detail is because I've been involved in a few Kaizens. In fact, it's probably completely my fault because I don't know how to run a Kaizen effectively. But I've been in Kaizens where we've gone down a bunch of tangents, all these weird rabbit holes, for example, that didn't really advance what we were doing. So going back and rebooting a little bit with the SIPOC helped us to refocus what it is that we were really trying to accomplish. Okay, any additional questions? A couple of the key points that if you watch that video on how to run an effective Kaizen on the SIPOC portion, Brad points out that, a few key points. We have a very high tolerance for waste. So even as we were going through this process here and just mapping all this stuff out, we just had so many things and so many ideas that we were just toying around with. But then once we cleaned it up, we got rid of all that extra stuff and just created that simplified version of it. Okay. All right, open format now. Any Stump the Checker questions or items? Okay, so just to follow up here and a couple of additional things. If you're logged in to the Walters and Wolf account. When you go to the Google Jamboard, you see that we actually have a bunch of Jamboards here, and you can be invited to these. Someone can send you the link, so you don't necessarily have to be logged on. But if you are logged on, you can see these. In a similar way, if you're logged in and you go to like some of the apps, we have several documents that we're using in Google Sheets, for example. So this is where we have the daily stand-up is here. So if you're logged in here, you can actually see the daily stand-up one, the one that we see each day that I bring up. You can access it from there. The other one that we have here, so I'm on the installation manual Kaizen team. So we're actually developing our sheets index for keeping track of what's completed on the installation manual process. I've converted those into sheets documents as well. So we've got a field index and a shop index. These are set up so that these header bars are locked. So if we go to print this to PDF, for example, it'll print as many pages as we need. And so even though I've only got that header bar on there one time, it reprints it on each page so that it'll be formatted correctly when we publish that into the installation manual. So those are some features that work well in Sheets. And then I've got the shop indexes in progress. So that one's got a bunch of work to be done on it still, but same thing where the index is just showing up. This is locked, and then the rest of it you can scroll through. So there's that one. The other one, we were talking earlier, when you go to the home and engineering and training page, we have a lot of content here. So if you haven't visited this, or if there's some additional trainings that have been done that you're interested in checking out, your trainings are available here. Sometimes it might be interesting just to, while you're doing your work, just listen to one of these training sessions, and you might pick up a few pointers that'll help you in doing your processes. The other thing is that the classroom trainings, like we're doing here, are longer sessions and they're being published. However, anyone has the ability to make an improvement video or to create a process video for something that they're doing. If you create content and you want to get it published, we actually have a module for that right at the beginning. So it's creating training, start here. And if you want to just submit a video, you just click on this, send mail to submit video. And there's a little pop-up that'll come up to see, do you want to open it? And this, we set this up specifically to go to the training support team, but then it's already pre-filled out and you just fill in these categories, the topic, the link to your YouTube video, and if there's any additional notes that you want us to be aware of, and then you send this, and the training support team will get this email with your link to your YouTube lesson. So if you're doing something, you're like, oh, this would probably be good, just publish so that somebody could benefit from this in the future. This is the way that you would use to just send it to us so that we can publish it. Then the next time we, when we go into this, let's say your item is a Revit training item. Well, then we'll just post it here. And then anybody that wants to go to Revit creating a component gasket can just click on that and watch that video. We have categories for Revit, BIM 360, AutoCAD, computer software, Jumpstart. We've got a PM training portion. We've got our schedule here, the classroom training content, which is all of our specific one, and then takeoff training. So if you're doing a takeoff process and you're thinking, well, we haven't documented that real well yet, I think I should do a little video on that. Please do. Just set up a little video and send it over. We've got Bluebeam, machine programming, PC training, how to the documentation for how do we actually work on this page, and there's even a new one, Dynamo. So feel free to create content and send it using that method. Okay, any additional notes or questions there? All right. Well, that's mostly what I want to have the discussions about today. I'll open it for one last segment. If anybody has an item or a specific thing that they're looking at, they're like, what's that supposed to do? Okay. I do have one more random one if I can bring this up. So in our project key sheets folder, when you bring up a key sheet, sometimes if you're doing a search, you want to try to find a unit number. You hit the U and then you start typing in your unit number, 0, whatever. It wants to autofill some of these categories. So let's say if I hit that, let's say if I was actually trying to type in this unit 054, and if it wants to autofill this, and if I just hit enter at this point, it'll search for and find that U054. But I don't always want to find that U054. Sometimes I may want to find just the U05. And if it wants to autofill that last character, you can hit the delete key and then hit enter, and then it'll search for that number. So I've found that that is helpful when I'm trying to find, if I'm typing in a number that I've typed in previously into my search window, because it likes to autofill those. Okay, so just a little tip there. Any questions or comments on today's training? Everybody happy?
Yes.
All right, very good. I'll stop share. Okay, well, thanks for coming to the training, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bill.
Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill.
See you next
Thanks,
time
Bill.
on Stump the Checker.
Thanks, Phil.
Season 1.